Everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master. My fish fam, welcome. If you are getting into the fish fam family, because we have a hell of a deck and a hell of a community. I'm here with my brother, and we're going to analyze modern Merfolk. And it's been a long time since I've done a really deep dive into the archetype. Usually I'm just like, all right, I'm playing this 4 cards, not this 4 cards. We'll go and do a deep dive of the modern Merfolk archetype for all of you that are just getting into it, because 2 Merfolk decks made the top 8 at Magic 30 in Vegas, and one of them was mine. And now Merfolk all of a sudden is on the map for modern. People are winning more with this deck now since, I don't know, since 2015. I don't remember another time people are so hyped to play and win with Merfolk at the same time. So this is the list that I played. This is the list. Let us start off with... Should we start off with the Lords? Okay, we start off with the Lords. The one thing about Merfolk that gives us... We do have to play with creatures. We're a creature-based deck. In my opinion, this is not an aggro deck. If you play Merfolk like an aggro deck, you're just going to lose constantly. If you just throw down your creatures and turn them sideways, you're just asking to get killed. You got to be very careful about these guys. These guys are important because not only are they your lords that buff your team, they help cheat in combat because they make your creatures unblockable. Other Merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Island Walk. Keep in mind that Lord of Atlantis says all other Merfolk get +1/+1 and have Island Walk. That means your opponent's Merfolk too. So if they've got a Mutavault on the other side of the battlefield, if a Ragavan stole one of your creatures and you played Lord of Atlantis, they're gonna eat it up. So against the Ragavan decks, lead with the Lord of Atlantis. Let them kill this thing first, so that if they steal any creatures, then they won't get buffed. This one, Master of the Pearl Trident, is only your Merfolk. The mirror can get absolutely insane and crazy. So be very careful about these creatures. My one piece of advice with the Lords is if you attack, always wonder what happens if they use a removal spell on the Lord. Or do they have good blocks? Do they have bad blocks? Does it matter? Are they like if they're tapped out, do whatever you want. If they're not tapped out, that can be a problem. It can be a really big problem. You could get completely blown out in combat. So that's always a question I'm always asking. And if they can blow you out in combat with like Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, Fatal Push, or Solitude or something, pass the turn. You're allowed to consider, can I pass the turn? Am I so... is the board more or less equal? Am I behind? Am I ahead? If you're ahead or the board is equal, you have a lot of room to pass the turn and build up your boards for a much safer attack, or until you get more information about what is in your opponent's hand, or if your opponent taps out or something. Otherwise, if you're behind, then you probably just have to say screw it. Just send them in. Send them in. Nothing much you can do about that. Okay, Fidelian Hexcatcher.
MVP.
Yeah, it's do you know what? This card is actually just a lot better than I gave credit for. It helped protect me against like Hammer Time. They tried to play like equipment, and then it's like sack a Merfolk. They have to pay one. I sacked another Merfolk. Then the equipment is countered. It's a blue 1 generic 1/1 flash creature. Other Merfolk you control get +1/+1. Sacrifice a Merfolk. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. This is great versus Living End, Crashing Footfalls. I mean, Renin 6 on the play. You can flash this in and then sacrifice maybe a 1-drop or sacrifice itself. So there's a lot of enchantments coming back, like what is that enchantment that is for red? It puts a 2/2 body in play. You discard card, you like loot, and then it puts like a something of the Mirror Breaker. Reflection of the Mirror Breaker. I don't remember that stupid enchantment. But like against any combo deck, great against Tron. It just has way too much utility. Downside is a 1/1 creature, but it's flash. But the huge upside is it has a generic mana in the casting cost, which is good because now I can overload on Mutavault, which was starting to become very clunky for Merfolk players. So we'll move on to Mutavault. I'm playing with 4. If you play with 4, the deck might feel a little clunky. You might feel like, hey, I don't have enough blue like lands in order to cast my spells. And that might be true, but I prefer the land because Mutavault has protection from sorceries. Mutavault has, which for example is like Fury. So protection from Fury, protection from stuff like Supreme Verdict. Really good at getting under the ground and hitting Planeswalkers after maybe a Planeswalker dealt with the board. It's extra threat density. So the fact that Hexcatcher was a creature at a blue and 1 generic allowed me to play 4 Mutavaults. I have to say, if you think it's too clunky and it's too hard to play, you can go down to 3. I think that is perfectly fine. 3 is acceptable. I'm willing to take on the clunk of 4 because I'm a Merfolk master, so I don't mind playing with 4 Mutavault. Okay, let's go almost like in order. 4 Cavernous Souls. Why do we want to play 4 Cavernous Souls? Oh yeah, Fable of the Mirror Breaker was the enchantment I was thinking about. 4 Cavernous Souls. You do not want to get blown out by Mystical Dispute. Mystical Dispute is the most popular counterspell in sideboards at the moment. It's being played in every single blue deck, whether it be Murktide or Crashing Footfalls or 4-color Omnath or what's it called? Living End. There's a lot of blue decks in the metagame right now. And we are Merfolk. We have Aether Vial, which can get underneath counter spells. And we do have Cavernous Souls, and I just think it is too important to dodge that counter magic. Not to mention Murktide, for one reason or another, I've been up against so many Murktide players. They just leave all their counter magic in their deck between counter spell and Mystical Dispute. And so I gotta have Cavernous Souls. I want to maximize my ability to have uncounterable spells against all those decks. Monster CC says, Cavern feels pretty good to me right now, only awkward with Subtlety. I don't mind it's that big of a deal with Subtlety because it's a 4-mana spell, so either you're playing it for free, or once you get to 4 mana, you should have double blue, for the most part. It may not be perfect, but if you don't, then Aether Vial can get you there anyway. So I have Cavernous Souls as a 4X. I think it's very important to make sure you never... If you get Mystical Disputed, it could be game over. It would just suck. You pay double blue, Lord of Atlantis, Mystical Dispute. Game could be over right there. You desperately needed to get that body on the battlefield, and it offers those free wins, because if the opponent has too much counter magic in hand, it's just all completely bricked and blanked, and yeah, easy victories. Love it. Now talking... Okay, we'll go to 10 islands. Okay, so here's the deal. Why do I have 10 islands and no other utility lands? Because some people are playing with 2 Otawara, some people are playing with Minamo so they can untap their Surveillance, some people are playing with Horizon lands. I don't want to lose to Blood Moon. Alright, I've played this deck for 8 years. The perfect number of islands in your deck to never lose to Blood Moon is 10. As simple as that. If you never want to lose to Blood Moon, you have 10 islands in your deck. Now, I would say if you go down to 9, it's okay, but now you're starting to be a little vulnerable to Blood Moon. Once in a while, it's going to scoop up a game or here or there. If you go down to 8, you're weak to Blood Moon. I would say you're going to be losing games pretty consistently. And then if you go to 7 islands, you might as well be a 2-color deck, and you will lose games very consistently to Blood Moon, and people would be smart to leave Blood Moon in versus you. That's my take on 10 islands and why I chose to have a solid 10 islands. And there's a lot of Blood Moon decks out there. You have Murktide is playing Blood Moon. Crashing Footfalls is playing Blood Moon, for crying out loud. The Scam decks are playing Blood Moon. So you gotta respect it. If you don't want to respect it, that's fine. There are other people doing not respecting Blood Moon. I want to respect Blood Moon. All right, so that's why I'm playing with the islands. I'm playing with 10, and I'm not going to go below that so long as Blood Moon is a pretty powerful presence in the current modern metagame. And you might say, well, Blood Moon shouldn't be good versus Merfolk because of Aether Vial in our islands. Yeah, but people keep it in anyway. Some people are like, well, I can't beat Mutavault and my counterspells are shut down by Cavernous Souls. So let's bring in Blood Moon and, neuter all those cards. So you can sometimes get hosed by Blood Moon. Dominic says, I watch your streams while playing MTG at home like other people and friends. Oh, excellent. Fantastic. Is 4 Cavern really necessary? My thinking is that you don't really need multiple, so 3 should be fine. You want to maximize your odds of getting it, though. If you go, the less of this card you play, the less likely you're going to draw it. And you can be guaranteed that someone's going to have some counter magic or, Mystical Dispute pretty consistently across the tournament. And so I think it's just too important to have. And I think it's a good edge to have in the Murktide matchup because they will leave a lot of counter magic in their deck between Mystical Dispute and Counterspell. So we talked about the 4 Mutavaults. Oboro, instead of Minamo. It's because I have 4 Mutavaults. That's basically what it is. Didn't come up in the tournament. You could. Honestly, I don't like Minamo. I don't like the idea of giving Svelune Vigilance. I think it's a waste. I just actually don't care about Minamo. I just care about Oboro for the most part. Because if I were to replace Oboro, I would just put another Otawara. I think Otawara is actually, it's pot. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should have 2 Otawara in this deck instead of an Oboro here. But I wanted the Oboro so that my Mutavault mana wasn't going to be too clunky. Because the trick is, if you have an Oboro and a Mutavault and no other land drops, you can cast your blue spells with this simple trick of tap in the Oboro for a blue, then you can spend 1 generic mana from the Mutavault to put Oboro back into your hand. You're still floating a blue. Then you play Oboro for your land drop for the turn and tap it for the second blue to cast your blue spells. Like Lord of Atlantis, Master of the Pearl Trident, maybe Merfolk Trickster if the time comes up. It might even randomly come up if you have to hard cast a Subtlety really awkwardly. If you have like too many Mutavaults and Cavernous Souls on Merfolk or something like that. That could actually happen. Mike J says, no one will play Blood Moon. Narrator's voice. They did indeed Blood Moon. Yes, that's what they do it. And it happened to me. We're going to go over my games. We're going to analyze my games from Magic 30, and I had to face Blood Moon. I had to face Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, and I didn't lose to them. I did face quite a few Blood Moons that weekend, and it didn't phase me whatsoever. 10 islands, fist pump, booyah. Know what I'm doing. Otawara, the best utility land ever for Merfolk for a very, very long time. Like I said, maybe Oboro should just be Otawara. Maybe. I respect the clunk of Mutavault. I don't know, maybe I should be playing with 1 less Mutavault, 1 Otawara. Otawara is a great card. For taps for a blue, and you can discard it for 1 blue, 3 generic. Return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to their owner's hand. And it costs 1 less to cast for each Svelune in play, because this is the only legendary creature that we're going to be playing here. Okay, Ether Vial. For Ether Vial, I wouldn't think of playing any other number. And still too relevant in the modern metagame. Even though that it's got weaker thanks to Prismatic Ending. People aren't even playing that card really all that much right now. It's not super popular. Yeah, Ether Vial, play your creatures at flash speed. Okay, 1 tip to the newbies. Just because you can activate Ether Vial doesn't mean you should. And what I mean by that is you're going to see me often play, I'm going to attack with some creatures on the ground. And I could put a Lord in play, but I don't, because I don't want to commit too many things to the board. I don't want to give my opponent too much information, because if I leave Ether Vial on 2, maybe I have a Lord. Maybe I got a Hexcatcher. Maybe I have a Trickster. And I want to keep my options open without committing too many creatures to the battlefield to get Furied or something like that. So if you tap your Ether Vial on your turn to add like 1 more point of damage, which I'm not going to say it's never worth it, but not often worth it. You give your opponent perfect information and you sacrifice options later on. I mean, or maybe you have a Silvergill Adept in your hand. So I should say, be patient with your Ether Vial. Try most of the time, put your creatures in play at the end of your opponent's turn. It's usually worth more damage like that. All right, Curse Catcher. This was a 2-of. Now I had a 5-0 with this list. That had all the 4 subtleties in the sideboard. And 4 Curse Catchers in the main deck. And I thought that was going to be my list for Vegas. But honestly, I went down to 6 creatures because every Merfolk 5-0 had 6 creatures. And I just wanted... And I was looking... Well, the deal is I wanted 2 Harbinger of the Tides in my sideboard. I wanted to give a little bit more respect to Hammer Time. It's not bad to bring in versus the Scam decks just to bounce a Grief or something. Or even sometimes bouncing a Ragavan after you get like a Chalice of the Void on the battlefield. What else do I want? I want a Harbinger for Hammer Time. Murktide. So some big heavy-hitting matchups I think are tough. So I decided instead of having 8 1-drop creatures between my Tide Shapers, my Curse Catchers, I went to 6. Because it just... I'm just going to trust the data. I think it was fine. Now, why Curse Catcher? Curse Catcher is a metagame call for Burn and Living End. Very specifically. I actually don't even think this is the best card. I would actually play with Rishadan Dockhand. And if you're in a metagame where Burn and Living End are not that big of a deal, I would actually suggest you play Dockhand instead. I would give Dockhand the seal of approval. It's a blue 1/2 creature, because the deal is this. Curse Catcher is weak to Fire and Ice, Fury, Ren and 6. Those are all terrible things to be weak to. Dockhand isn't, so more resistant to Fire and Ice, Ren and 6, and Fury. with the more toughness. And I think it still interacts against a lot of those decks too anyway. Like, it interacts relatively well versus Cascade decks, and I think it's more applicable, and I like what it does versus Urza Saga decks. But I want to give respect to Burn. Burn... Merfolk used to be really good versus Burn, but now it's getting really awkward. Even with Hexcatcher in the mix, we're still just a bunch of random creatures with no big bombs, and we have to slowly pick away at our opponent's life total and win. I think Curse Catcher is a big help, and and it's still, Curse Catcher is still good versus not only both Cascade decks more or less, but I really want an edge versus Living End, because I also think that's a tough matchup that I want to respect, even though it looks like we're going to hose them. They have a lot of game. Okay, Tide Shaper. So Tide Shaper is an all-star for this deck. It could be a 1-mana 1/1, but normally I'm not going to play it as that. The only time... Okay, look at the card. It's a Merfolk Wizard, kicker of 1. When Tide Shaper enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target land becomes an island for as long as Tide Shaper remains on the battlefield. And it gets... But here's an important part. Tide Shaper gets +1/+1 as long as its opponent controls an island. If there's one advantage I got at Magic 30, it's that, like, 4 very good players all blundered versus Tide Shaper. And almost always with Fire and Ice. Like, they would go, fire your Silvergill and Tide Shaper. And then find out that, oh, Tide Shaper, even though I don't kick it, so long as my opponent has an island, whether they're a Murktide deck, Crashing Footfalls, Omnath, so long as they're a Murktide deck, so long as they have an island, it's going to get +1/+1. So I was up against a lot of players that misassigned damage versus Tide Shaper because they thought it was just a 1/1, even though I just play it for 1 blue. And yeah, they got unpleasantly surprised.
Wamp wamp.
Yeah, wamp wamp wamp. They were like this. Tide Shaper's a 2/2. Big boy, were the top 8 lists posted anywhere? Didn't see them on Goldfish. Maybe not yet, but Frank Karsten made a article on magic.gg or something like that. I can't remember what the site is. So anyway, now this is what I want you to do with Tide Shaper. You can play it out as a 1-drop if you have like a ton of lords in your hand. Like tons. It's like you have like, I don't know, a hand, 2 lands, 1 Tide Shaper, 4 lords. It would be appropriate to play Tide Shaper as a 1-drop. But for the most part, I want you to hold it back. I want you to play it as a 2-mana card because A, you might need the Island Walk, and B, if you're up against an Urza Saga deck, hold it back! Don't try to mana screw them. If you're up against an Urza Saga deck, do your best to hold this thing back and blow up the Urza Saga, because when they play Urza Saga and you turn into an island, then it no longer... I can't remember how the interaction works, but just understand it will blow up the land. It's like it has no more chapters anymore, and if the chapters are greater than, I don't remember how the rules work. Whatever. Tide Shaper. Silvergill Adept. Blue, 1 generic 2/1 creature, and as an additional cost to cast this spell, reveal a Merfolk card from your hand or pay 3. Remember, if you play it off of Aether Vial, you're not casting it, so you don't have to reveal anything. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. There's flavor text on this? I bring baubles of lore, lost secrets, seen from the listening waves. Well, my versions are in Japanese, so I didn't know there's flavor text on this card. All right, you learn something new every day. So here's the deal with Silvergill Adept. It used to be one of the best creatures in the Merfolk deck. I actually now think it's one of the worst. And as you see, and I would say if you are having trouble siding things out when you're siding things in, consider siding out Silvergill Adept. It's worse. It's so badly positioned than ever before. Right now, a lot of decks, I would say in any matchup where you would die with cards in your hand, you could side out Silvergill Adept because the card advantage is nothing. You want to be interacting with your opponent. So stuff like Hammer Time, for example, Silvergill Adept sucks. Because if you play turn 2 Silvergill Adept, you might just die to Hammer on the following turn. Now, another thing that makes Silvergill Adept bad is that the 1 toughness is just bad. Again, vulnerable to Fury, Fire and Ice, to Ren and 6. It's not worth it to play 2 mana for a 2/1 that's going to get sniped off by a Planeswalker for 2 mana. You're just wasting your time. And another thing about Silvergill Adept is that it's not very good at attacking or blocking because of the 1 toughness. So very often I sided out Silvergill Adept more often than I ever did in my entire life. at Magic 30. So those are my thoughts on Silvergill Adapt. Another reason we're siding it out so much is the cards are so good now. Like, it's hard to side stuff out. Like in the past of Merfolk, we had like a bunch of like random sideboard junk that'd be in the main deck that we would side out. Now, like our list is getting pretty strong. So the odd one out is now Silvergill Adept. Zeagle says, data proved me wrong, but I had some success with spreading seas over Silvergill Adept. Any opinion on that? I think it is very much worth experimenting. I will experiment it with it immediately. My next stream. So yeah, I think it's an interesting idea to side in all the spreading seas and replace Silvergill Adapt with it, and that would give me more room in the sideboard for like 2 more Harbinger of the Tides, maybe 1 more Chalice of the Void, or maybe shave a Chalice of the Void and play 2 Flusterstorm or something like that. So I really like that idea. But hey, we gotta play it out. It's gotta be play tested. And then I think we did Vidalian Hexcatcher. Merfolk Trickster, blue 2/2 flash creature. Enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. It loses all abilities until end of turn. Merfolk Trickster is very nice in creature combat. It can also blow up construct tokens from Urza's Saga or Urza himself, because the creatures are anything with like an XX in its power and toughness will just die instantly. Tarmogoyf gets rendered down to a 0/1 creature, so just keep all that stuff in mind. Its best utility right now is against Dragon Rage Chandler. I would say hold your Trickster versus Murktide. Like, hold it back for a little while. Let Dragon Rage Chandler, like, I don't know, beat you down. Or I would say save your Trickster for a moment where when the Dragon Rage Chandler has to attack, because it has to and it has Delirium, you flash in the Trickster, target the Dragon Rage Chandler, it will become a 1/1, and then you block it, or gang block it with Trickster and a few other creatures. That's a really good way of using Trickster as removal versus the Murktide deck. Other uses of Trickster is, it's just nice to be able to pass the turn, hold up maybe some counter magic, maybe even hold up Subtlety, and if your opponent doesn't do anything, you flash in a Trickster. Or, you know, and what's great now, actually, is we can pass the turn with, like, blue, and they don't know if we have a Trickster or a Hexcatcher. In the past, if I held up 2 blue mana, then if I ended up holding up 2 blue mana, my opponent would always know I have a Trickster. Now they have no idea, they have no damn clue what I have. Maybe I have Hexcatcher, maybe I have Trickster, who knows? Maybe they have, yeah. So anyway, some of my opponents made some big mistakes because they just assumed I'd have Hexcatcher. Extreme V1 question: do you feel we're lucky in terms of having good matchups? No, all my matchups were brutal. I didn't have any. I had some good matchups. I would say I was up against what's it called, a Scred Red. I think that's a good matchup. I've never really lost to that before. Although it was Scred Red with upgrades. I had Season Pyromancer, Fury, Ragavan. So maybe it's not as good as I think it is. And my top 8 winning in was Hammer, which was a disaster. That something was leaking out of my pants because of that. I was so scared. Okay, moving on. Sveilun of Sea and Sky. One of the greatest upgrades to this deck. Blue, 1 generic, 3/4, Merfolk God. Has indestructible as long as you control at least 2 other Merfolk. Whenever it attacks, draw a card, and other Merfolk you control have Ward 1. I don't know what to really say about this card. It's a big, beefy creature that can just consistently draw you cards. So if you run out of cards in your hand, you just keep attacking with Sveilun and refill her up. Refill up. Okay, now Vittorio says, are 4 Dismember a must? Yes, in my opinion. Why 4 Dismember? Why am I dealing so much pain to myself? And the answer is... Hold on, we have where's my extra sound effects? Oh, that's the wrong one. I wanted a drum roll. Ragavan. You need to have a solid answer to Ragavan on the draw. And there's a lot of decks playing Ragavan. You know, the Breach deck is playing Ragavan. You've got Blue-Red Murktide playing Ragavan. You have the, what's it called? The Rakdos Scam plays Ragavan. There are tons of Ragavan decks out there. And if you do not answer, if you do not have a good answer to Ragavan on the draw, then you will get stomped by that thing and you'll give your opponent free wins. And make no mistake, a lot of those Ragavan decks are playing blue. So Ragavan can hit any of this stuff and then use it to their own, like, to their own bidding. People have, you know, Ragavan has hit me, revealed a Sveloon of Sea and Sky. They played it, and I just lost to my own Sveloon. So, I think Ragavan on the draw needs to be respected, and I think Dismember is just playable versus everything.
I think Ragavan just needs to be banned.
With the exception of maybe, like, Living End. Like, Dismember is playable against almost everything. Like, I mean, even against crashing Footfall decks, you can Dismember perhaps, like, a Brazen Borrower in the air. And, you know, so it's not terrible. So I actually think 4 of is a must. I wouldn't play less than 4 right now. For as long as Ragavan, I think, is going to be a very relevant card in Modern, I'm going to be playing with Dismember in the main, and 4 of. Now, you might say, is 4 too many? Okay, look. On day 2 of Magic 30, I was up against Tribal Zoo. Sorry, Domain Zoo. I was up against Domain Zoo, the 5-color deck. Where they played Ragavan, they played that Kavu, they played Draco, they played, anyway, a lot of creatures. And in all my games, I dismembered. In the key game to win my, like, round 9 win, I played 3 dismembers, putting my life total down to 8. But it was so important, because those creatures are gone. It's better the creature is dead and will never deal damage to you than to let it sit there and smack you in the face over and over again. So I think Dismember it's okay to go to 8. It's okay. You gotta live on the edge like that sometimes. Yeah, the little monkey is all over the place. Who's the second voice? It's my brother. I feel like, yes, it's your only removal. It's good removal. I think the only thing it doesn't kill is it doesn't kill Murktide all the time, which sucks. But outside of that, it's good removal. I think it's reliable.
It was completely clutch in your final round.
Yeah, it was. It kills Stoneforge Mystic. I think it's very relevant versus Hammer. I think it's mana efficient. It's just 1 mana. Don't be afraid of taking 4 damage. Just make sure you play it early enough, that's all. And then Subtlety. So I used to be so high on Subtlety, and I still am, because this is the difference between winning and losing versus control decks these days, and also especially Amulet Titan. So it's a flash creature that can put Planeswalkers back on top of our owner's library. So I think Subtlety is a great card. I originally actually had 4 of them in the sideboard. I'm not super high on Subtlety these days. Because it's a good but not amazing creature in a random metagame right now. I used to like it versus like Murktide, but it's a bit awkward because you could pitch it to hit a Murktide, but then your opponent plays Mystical Dispute or Counterspell, and I don't think it's as effective versus Murktide as I used to think. They're just keeping too much of their counter magic in there, so it's hard to use Subtlety. Still, I'll have 4 of them in my deck, no problem. Just love the card, but I split it up. All right, 4 more Spreading Seas. Guess what we have Spreading Seas for? Urza Saga. Urza Saga needs to be respected. So, Tide Shaper is in the deck mainly for Island Walk. Give you that Island Walk. And, hey, it's upside if you're up against an Urza Saga deck. Spreading Seas is specifically for the Urza Saga decks, and I will almost always side in all 4 of them versus most Urza Saga decks. Some of them maybe not. But like some of them, I might have other better sideboard cards to bring in. I think versus Breach, I bring in like 2 Spreading Seas because I crush that deck. I just absolutely crush Breach. So 4 Spreading Seas brought in versus the Urza Saga decks. I would say be patient with your Spreading Seas because your opponent doesn't always play Urza Saga on turn 2. They might play it turn 3, 4, or 5, and you gotta be prepared for it. I think it's too hard of a hassle to fight through an Urza Saga. Yeah, you can snipe one of the construct tokens away with Merfolk Trickster, but then they're going to get another construct anyway. Then they're going to get like Shadow Spear or some sort of artifact that's going to be annoying. I think it's just much more backbreaking. Just blow up their Urza Saga and draw a card. So that's what I have Spreading Seas for. Lord Magicus with a question. Should Subtlety be sideboarded in favor of Seas or Force? You could do that. I would say this is a flex spot for you, but I prefer to have the Subtlety in the main. I think there's enough. I like having a heavy creature-based main deck. But you know what? I wouldn't be opposed to that idea of putting a Force in exchange for Subtlety, but I don't feel too strongly about these 2 slots over here. I feel very strongly about all these other slots. All these other numbers, but I don't feel very strongly about this. This is like a 2 flex slot. You You could have Harbinger if you wanted. Well, probably not. I think Harbinger is a bit narrow, but you could definitely have Force Negation or Spreading Seas. Is Vial worse than a Mana Dork if the starting order is important in a Raga meta? Not necessarily. I think Vial is still fine. Force is miles ahead of Subtlety. Still can't cast an attack with it. Still can't do that. Okay, Spreading Seas. So the main reason for Spreading Seas, Urza Saga. You see Urza Saga, you bring in the Spreading Seas. Harbinger of the Tides. I already went over this a little bit earlier because I made room specifically for Harbinger. I could sleep better at night for Harbinger. It never really came up the entire time at Magic 30. Just never showed up. So I put it in my deck for nothing. But it was in my deck specifically for the Murktide matchup. So and hey, we have 4 Cavernous Souls to make sure when they attack with Murktide, we are definitely... This spell will definitely resolve and bounce that Murktide back to their hand. And it's also it's good but not great versus Hammer Time. At least, you know, I like the idea of them equipping a hammer with Sigarda's Aid. Maybe I chump block or tap it down with Trickster, and then I can bounce the creature like Ornithopter on my turn, and then they have no way of re-equipping the hammer because they depended completely on Sigarda's Aid. And then it's good in like other matchups, like I brought it in versus Zoo. I'm sure it's good in the it's great in the mirror, the Merfolk mirror. So it has application. And I like it on the draw versus burn. For Force Negation, bring it in versus the combo decks. I don't know what to say about this. It is pretty mandatory. Oh no, sorry, maybe it's not that mandatory. If you think this is too expensive for you, you could play Counterspell, Spell Pierce. Although if you play Counterspell, you have to play with less Cavernous Souls. Spell Pierce is fine. Like any other counter spells that can interact will be okay. But Force Negation is the best. This is just the absolute best. How do you feel about Master of Waves in the side? I think it's crap. I think it's absolute crap. I think the metagame is far beyond Master of Waves playability. You know what hurts Master of Waves a lot? Is, so the chat is asking about Master of Waves. The biggest thing that crushes Master of Waves right now is Dress Down. It removes the pro red and it kills all the elementals instantly. It makes Master of Waves useless. So basically Dress Down has like sealed its Master of Waves fate, unfortunately.
Until it's banned.
Do you feel strong about the 1-drop, or do you think we are getting we can get away without having them? Well, we have to have the 1-drops. No, I think I like the 6 1-drops. The math was the math. Like all the winning deck lists had 6 creatures. I actually pushed it to 8 and then removed 2, but all the winning deck lists have 6 creatures. And it feels good. It feels right. Sort of get on the board early. Okay, 2 extra subtlety in the sideboard. Chalice of the Void.
Rhinos.
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 Rhinos, Living End. You can play it on 1 versus Murktide. I honestly don't feel that strong about this card. One problem with Chalice of the Void is that it is a supremely popular card in everyone else's sideboard. And because of that, everyone who's scared of Chalice of the Void is prepared. So the Crashing Footfall player will have the Petty Theft, will have the Boseiju. They're going to have the answers available for Chalice of the Void. And every deck is in the same position, including, like, if you're up against Murktide, they're going to bring in Engineered Explosives. So any deck, and same thing with Scam. Scam can play Engineered Explosives and Kolaghan's Command versus Chalice of the Void. So I am not super high on Chalice of the Void, and I think you could get away with something like Flusterstorm instead. I don't know what's best. I like the convenience of Chalice of the Void. You put it out there on 0, then you don't have to hold up any more mana, and that sometimes is relevant versus... That's, I think, pretty relevant versus Living End very often. I like to... Well, let's say I don't want the game to go on too long. Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to play patiently, but I don't want the game to go on too long. So I'm not thrilled with Chalice of the Void, but I still think it's a good card. But I could be wrong. Maybe Flusterstorm is a better replacement to Chalice of the Void. Because, like, Flusterstorm's interesting versus Crashing Footfalls. Because you can hit a lot of the other cards, like, you know, their Petty Theft, their Stomps, their Fire and Ice. So you can interact with their interaction against you while still hitting the Crashing Footfalls. Surgical Extraction too slow versus Ragavan? Sounds useless. How are you going to get the Ragavan in the graveyard? It's no, that's not how you use Surgical Extraction. Use Essence Scatter instead of Force Negation? That's terrible. Force Negation is here as a what? I think someone's trolling me here. I'm actually starting to appreciate a couple copies of Spell Pierce on the side. Honestly, I would probably play Flusterstorm over Spell Pierce. I mean, Spell Pierce maybe is okay, because it does hit Ren and 6. But a lot of those Ren and 6 decks are going to go long, and, like, here's a problem with Spell Pierce. And a lot of people would think, oh, well, it's good versus Ren and 6. Well, maybe, maybe not. Like, what are you going to do when you have Spell Pierce and Ether Vial on turn 1 versus a Ren and 6 deck on the draw? You gonna hold up the blue and then place Ether Vial on turn 2? Like, I don't know, maybe, but then what if they don't play the Ren and 6? And then my biggest problem is that Ren and 6 decks will get a lot of mana over the course of the game, and your Spell Pierce is almost certainly a dead top deck, so you're forced to have that Ren and 6 in your starting hand. Alright, and that's the in-depth deck tech. If there's any questions you have about any of the cards, I don't know, let me know in the comments section, and maybe I can answer them. And so I let you know what I think is important and what you can, like, basically shave for other cards, because there's room to, like, change the stuff around. I don't think, like, the 75 is completely sold, but a lot of people are winning with the shell, so there's something going on here. There's something to this list. And for everyone watching the stream, we're going to keep streaming. We're going to analyze my Merfolk list, but for everyone on the replay, well, that's the video for today. So thank you very much for watching. Yeah, see you next time.